Lucas had always known that his path in life was set long before he was even born. Growing up in one of the country's most powerful and influential families, there was never any doubt about what was expected of him. His father, Marcos Castillo, was a legend in the legal world, a lawyer who never lost a case, and the Castillo name had become synonymous with success in court. For Lucas, following in these footsteps wasn't just expected, it was demanded. He could still remember the long dinner conversations where his future was discussed as if it were inevitable. A career in law wasn't just a goal, it was his birthright, a heavy, gilded burden he was supposed to carry with pride. From a young age, Lucas had been groomed to be the next great Castillo. Elite schools, private tutors, mingling with high society's legal elite. It was all part of the plan, yet there was a part of Lucas that never truly fit into that world. His heart beat for something else. Since childhood, soccer had been the one thing that made him feel alive. While his father brought him to courtrooms to teach him the art of debate, Lucas would secretly dream about being out on a field, kicking a ball, not stuck in the rigid world of legal arguments and contracts. His mother, Isabel, had always been a quieter figure in the family. She supported Marcos in public, but Lucas knew she understood him in ways his father never could. With her, the weight of his preordained future seemed to lift a little. While she rarely spoke out against her husband's wishes, she had a way of silently encouraging Lucas to follow what made him happy. When Lucas was 10, his father hired a private tutor to prepare him for the school's legal debate competitions. But it was his mother who quietly slipped him a new soccer ball, telling him to get outside and play whenever he had the chance. It was their unspoken secret. He knew he wouldn't be able to live in both worlds forever. Eventually, he would have to choose. Now, at 21, that choice loomed larger than ever. Lucas was in his final year at the country's top law school, and he was excelling, just as his father had always predicted. But as graduation approached and prestigious law firms began offering him internships, Lucas felt a growing void inside. The legal world suffocated him, and the pressure to take his place in the family legacy was almost unbearable. But soccer never left him. Even while studying law, Lucas played for an amateur team on the weekends, without his father's knowledge. It was his escape, his sanctuary, and he was good, really good. Friends and teammates often told him he had the talent to go far, but Lucas had never dared to think of it as a real option. How could he? His father, the great Marcos Castillo, would never allow his only son to choose soccer over law. Still, doubts started creeping in. What if he could follow his dream? What was really at stake? The family name, the inheritance, the financial support, of course. But was it worth sacrificing his happiness just to live up to other people's expectations? These questions gnawed at him every time he laced up his soccer cleats. The internal struggle grew stronger as time went on. He knew he was nearing the point of no return, where he wouldn't be able to avoid the decision any longer. On one side was the crushing weight of his family's expectations. On the other was the immense desire for the freedom that soccer offered. Lucas often wondered if his father would ever understand his passion for the game, or if it would destroy their relationship completely. The only person he could confide in was his mother. Isabel would listen quietly when he spoke about his insecurities. While she never outright told him to give up law, she also never discouraged his love for soccer. "Do what makes you happy, Lucas," she would say with a gentle smile, squeezing his hand. But Lucas knew that choosing soccer would mean walking away from everything he had known. His life would change in ways he couldn't yet predict, but one thing was certain. Soon, he would have to decide whether to follow the path his family had laid out for him, or forge his own through the sport he loved. The opportunity came out of nowhere, like a lifeline thrown to him when he was drowning in uncertainty. Lucas had just finished a game with his amateur soccer team, feeling the familiar rush of excitement and freedom that always came when he stepped off the field. As he wiped the sweat from his brow, he noticed a man watching him from the sidelines. The man, dressed in casual but expensive-looking clothes, approached Lucas with a confident stride. "Lucas Castillo?" the man asked, his voice smooth, like he already knew the answer. Lucas nodded, slightly confused. "Yeah, that's me." The man extended his hand. "I'm Rafael. I scout for a few teams in the professional league. I've been watching you play for a while now. You've got serious talent." Lucas blinked, trying to process what he was hearing. "Wait, are you saying—" "I'm saying," Rafael interrupted with a smile, "that you could have a real future in soccer if you're willing to take the leap. There's a spot opening up on a first division team, and I think you'd be a perfect fit. The club wants to bring you in for a trial." Lucas felt the ground shift beneath his feet. A shot at going pro? He had never allowed himself to dream that far. Playing in the big leagues seemed like something that happened to other people, not to someone who was being groomed to take over a family empire. "That's incredible," Lucas finally managed to say, his mind racing. "But I'm still in law school and my family—" Rafael gave him a knowing look. "I've heard about your family, but the question is, what do you want, Lucas? This is your shot. Think about it." He handed Lucas a business card with his contact details and turned to leave. "You've got talent, kid. Don't waste it." Lucas stared at the card for a long time after Rafael left, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The decision that had been haunting him for years had just landed in his lap. He could see the future laid out in front of him. On one side, the life his father wanted for him, filled with courtrooms, legal battles, and prestigious titles. On the other, the life he wanted, one where he was free to pursue his passion for soccer, to chase his own dream. But how could he ever make that choice? His father's voice echoed in his mind, stern and commanding, reminding him of everything that had been invested in his legal education. The Castillo family had built a legacy that stretched back generations, and Lucas was supposed to carry that legacy forward. If he walked away now, he knew his father would never forgive him. Later that night, Lucas sat at the dinner table with his parents, the familiar weight of expectation pressing down on him. His father was talking about an upcoming case, but Lucas wasn't listening. All he could think about was the card burning a hole in his pocket and the decision he didn't want to face. After dinner, he found his mother in the kitchen, quietly cleaning up. She glanced up at him, a knowing look in her eyes. "You've got something on your mind," she said softly, setting down a dish. "Want to talk about it?" Lucas hesitated. He had never spoken openly to either of his parents about his soccer ambitions, but if anyone would understand, it was his mother. "There's an opportunity," he said, his voice low, "to play soccer professionally." His mother's eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't speak. Lucas continued, "A scout approached me today after the game. He said I have a shot at joining a first division team. It's what I've always wanted, Mom, but I don't know how to tell Dad. He'll never accept it." Isabel sighed, drying her hands on a towel. "Your father has always had a very clear idea of what he wants for you, but that doesn't mean it's the only path. What do you want, Lucas?" "I want to play," Lucas admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want to lose him or disappoint him." His mother stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You have to decide what makes you happy, not what makes us proud. If soccer is your dream, you have to follow it. Your father may not understand now, but he loves you. That won't change." Lucas wasn't so sure. The next day, he arranged a meeting with Rafael and the team's manager. They talked about contracts, the trial period, and what his future could look like if he decided to pursue a professional career. It all seemed too good to be true, but it also felt right, like this was what he was meant to do. Then came the hardest part, telling his father. That evening, he waited until after dinner, when his father was sitting in his study, going over case files. Lucas knocked softly and stepped inside, feeling his heart race. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important." His father looked up, slightly annoyed at being interrupted. "Can it wait, Lucas?" I'm reviewing a deposition. No, Lucas said, his voice stronger than he expected. It can't wait. Marcos leaned back in his chair, gesturing for Lucas to continue. All right, what is it? Lucas took a deep breath. I've been offered a trial with a first division soccer team. I'm going to pursue it. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcos's eyes darkened, his expression unreadable. You're throwing away your future for soccer? Marcos said finally, his voice low and cold. After everything I've done for you? After all the sacrifices I've made to put you through law school? Lucas braced himself. I'm not throwing anything away, Dad. I'm following my dream. Your dream, Marcos repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. You're just like your mother, living in a fantasy. If you walk out of this house to chase some foolish dream, don't expect to come back. Lucas felt the finality of his father's words hit him like a punch to the gut. But he stood firm. I'm sorry, Dad, but this is something I have to do. Without another word, Lucas turned and walked out, feeling the weight of his decision settle on his shoulders. The door closed behind Lucas with a heavy thud, and for a moment, he stood there in the hallway, letting the silence of the house sink in. His father's words echoed in his mind. Don't expect to come back. The finality of it hit hard. This was it. He had chosen soccer over his family's legacy, and the cost was going to be steep. Lucas gathered a few things from his room, a duffel bag with some clothes, his soccer gear, and his laptop. He didn't know where he would go, but he knew he couldn't stay. His father's words left no room for compromise. As he walked down the stairs, he saw his mother standing by the kitchen doorway, her face pale and full of quiet sadness. She didn't say anything, but her eyes spoke volumes. She knew this was the moment Lucas had been dreading for years, the moment where he had to choose his own path, even if it meant breaking away from everything he'd ever known. I'm proud of you, Isabel said softly, stepping forward to embrace him. The hug was tight, filled with unspoken emotion. It's going to be hard, but you're doing the right thing. Lucas held on to her for a moment longer, not wanting to let go. His mother had always been his quiet supporter, the only one who understood his need to follow his heart. But even she couldn't shield him from the consequences of his decision. Thanks, Mom, he whispered, for everything. She gave him a sad smile and handed him an envelope. There's a little money in here, just to get you started. I wish I could do more, but... Lucas shook his head, blinking back tears. This is more than enough. I'll figure it out. With one last glance at the house he'd called home for his entire life, Lucas walked out into the night, unsure of where he would go, but certain that he was making the right choice. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Rafael, the scout who had given him the opportunity of a lifetime. Training starts tomorrow at 9 a.m. Be ready. Lucas stared at the message for a moment, letting the reality of his new life sink in. There was no turning back now. The world of soccer awaited him, but the road ahead was far from easy. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of new experiences and challenges. Lucas reported to the club's training ground the morning after leaving home, trying to ignore the heavy pit in his stomach that reminded him of all he had left behind. The professional world of soccer was intense, far more demanding than anything he had ever experienced playing in amateur leagues. The players were faster, stronger, and more skilled. It was clear that if Lucas wanted to make it here, he'd have to work harder than ever. Without the financial cushion of his family's wealth, life became more complicated. Lucas moved into a small, run-down apartment near the training grounds, scraping by on the little money his mother had given him. He couldn't afford luxuries anymore. Every cent went to rent, food, and basic necessities. The contrast between his old life and his new one was staggering. Gone were the days of private tutors, fancy dinners, and the comfort of knowing that he had his family's financial safety net. Now it was just him, his talent, and his will to succeed. Despite the hardships, there was a strange sense of freedom that came with this new life. For the first time, Lucas was truly in control of his destiny. Every success, every failure was his own. There was no one to blame, no one to please but himself. Training was grueling, and Lucas found himself exhausted at the end of each day. He pushed his body to its limits, determined to prove that he belonged in this world. There were moments of doubt, especially when he struggled to keep up with the more experienced players. But every time he felt like giving up, he thought of his mother's words, "You're doing the right thing." It was the motivation he needed to keep going. But the cost of rebellion wasn't just physical or financial. It was emotional. Lucas missed his family, especially his mother. He hadn't spoken to his father since the night he left, and the silence between them weighed heavily on his heart. Even though he knew his father's disapproval had been inevitable, it didn't make the separation any easier. His new teammates treated him with a mix of curiosity and caution. Some admired his decision to leave behind a life of luxury to pursue his dream, while others viewed him as just another rich kid playing at being a soccer star. Lucas could sense the skepticism in their eyes, and it only fueled his determination to prove them wrong. Each day on the field was a new battle, but Lucas embraced the struggle. For the first time in his life, he was chasing something that was entirely his own. The path wasn't clear, and the obstacles were many, but he knew this was where he was meant to be. The first few months of training were nothing short of brutal. Every muscle in Lucas's body ached, his feet blistered from hours of drills, and his mind was constantly racing with doubts. But there were also moments of exhilaration, like the first time he felt the rhythm of a game click into place, moving in sync with his teammates. Slowly but surely, he was finding his footing in the professional world. The coaching staff saw potential in Lucas, but they also made it clear that potential wasn't enough. This was the top tier of soccer. Talent alone wouldn't get him far. Hard work, grit, and consistency were the name of the game. Lucas was learning that lesson the hard way. He struggled to keep up with the pace of the game, often finding himself a step behind or making rookie mistakes that earned him sharp criticism from the coaches. One particularly tough day at practice, Lucas missed an easy pass that could have set up a goal. His teammate, Andre, a seasoned player with years of experience, glared at him from across the field. "You've got to be sharper than that, kid," Andre barked. "This isn't a hobby. You mess up out here, and it costs us all." Lucas nodded, swallowing his frustration. He knew Andre was right, but the pressure was starting to wear him down. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion. It was the mental toll of trying to prove himself day in and day out, all while carrying the weight of everything he had left behind. At night, in his tiny apartment, Lucas would replay the day's practice over and over in his mind. Every mistake felt magnified, every misstep a sign that he wasn't cut out for this life. The expectations of his father, though unspoken, loomed over him. He had chosen this path, but what if he wasn't good enough? Despite the doubts, Lucas had moments where his talent shone through. In scrimmages, his speed and agility caught the attention of the coaches. He had a knack for being in the right place at the right time, and when everything clicked, he was unstoppable. The thrill of scoring a goal, hearing the coaches shout his name in approval, and feeling the rush of adrenaline made all the pain worth it. Those were the moments that kept him going. But just as Lucas was starting to feel like he was making progress, reality hit hard. During a critical scrimmage game, he went in for a tackle and twisted his ankle badly. The sharp pain shot up his leg, and he crumpled to the ground, clutching his ankle as the game came to a halt around him. The team's medical staff rushed to his side, and within minutes, Lucas was being helped off the field, his mind racing with fear. What if this was it? What if the injury set him back so far that he'd lose his spot on the team before he even had a chance to prove himself? For the next few weeks, Lucas was sidelined, forced to watch from the bench as his teammates continued to train and improve. He attended every practice, taking notes, observing, and doing everything he could to stay mentally engaged. But it wasn't the same. Sitting on the sidelines was torture. Watching others play the game he loved while he was stuck with his ankle wrapped in ice felt like a cruel twist of fate. His teammates moved on without him, their performances growing sharper while Lucas struggled to stay relevant. He could feel the distance growing between him and the rest of the team. While they bonded on the field, he was an outsider. left alone to nurse his injury and his insecurities. There were days when Lucas considered quitting. He had left everything behind for this, and now here he was, injured, isolated, and unsure of whether he would ever make it back on the field. The thought of calling his father, of asking for help, crossed his mind more than once, but the memory of their last conversation always stopped him. His father had made it clear there was no going back. But even in his lowest moments, Lucas couldn't let go of the dream. Every time he watched a game, every time he saw the ball hit the back of the net, something inside him reignited. He wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. When his ankle finally healed, Lucas returned to training with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't going to let the injury define him. He was stronger now, more determined. Every sprint, every pass, every tackle, he gave it everything he had. And slowly, the coaches began to take notice again. The journey was far from over, but Lucas had made it through his first real test. He had risen, fallen, and now he was starting to climb back up. Just as Lucas was beginning to regain his confidence on the field, life delivered another blow, one he never saw coming. It started with a missed phone call from his mother. Then two. At first, he thought nothing of it. He was busy with training, trying to fight his way back into the starting lineup. And sometimes they would go days without speaking. But when the missed calls turned into a voicemail from her doctor, panic gripped him. Lucas didn't even wait to listen to the full message. His heart pounded as he dialed the number back, praying it was some kind of mistake. But when the doctor answered, the news was worse than anything Lucas had imagined. Isabel was in the hospital, and it wasn't good. The doctor's voice was calm but firm, explaining the severity of her condition. She had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer. The symptoms had been subtle at first, tiredness, a cough that wouldn't go away, but now it had spread, and the prognosis wasn't promising. Lucas felt the floor drop out from under him. The world around him blurred, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. His mother had always been his rock, the quiet support who understood him better than anyone. How could she have hidden this from him? And why now, just as he was getting his life back on track? Without thinking twice, Lucas packed a small bag and headed straight to the hospital. The entire drive felt surreal, his mind reeling as he tried to process the news. Cancer? Late stage? The words seemed distant, like they didn't belong in his world, yet they clung to him like a weight he couldn't shake. When he arrived at the hospital, the sight of his mother in a hospital bed, pale and weak, shattered whatever hope he had left that this was all some terrible mistake. Isabel smiled weakly as he entered the room, but Lucas could see the pain in her eyes. She looked smaller, more fragile than he had ever seen her. "Mom," Lucas whispered, rushing to her side. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to begin. His voice cracked with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me?" Isabel sighed softly, reaching out to take his hand. "I didn't want to worry you, Lucas. You were finally starting to live your dream, and I didn't want to take that away from you." Tears stung his eyes as he gripped her hand tightly. "I should have known. I should have been here." "You're here now," she said, her voice weak but steady. "That's all that matters." The next few hours passed in a blur of doctors, nurses, and quiet conversations. Lucas tried to wrap his head around what was happening, but nothing made sense. His mother, the woman who had always been there for him, was slipping away. The doctors told him the truth. There wasn't much time left. Weeks, maybe a few months if they were lucky. Lucas felt like he was being torn apart from the inside. How could he focus on soccer now, with his mother fighting for her life? Everything he had worked for suddenly seemed small, insignificant in the face of what was happening. His mind raced with thoughts of quitting, of leaving soccer behind to spend whatever time he had left with her. But Isabel, even in her weakened state, could see the turmoil in his eyes. She knew what he was thinking before he even said a word. "Don't you dare give up on your dream because of me," she said softly but firmly. "I won't allow it." Lucas stared at her, his throat tightening. "Mom, I can't. How am I supposed to keep going when you're like this? I need to be here with you." "You need to play," Isabel insisted, her eyes flashing with the same quiet strength that had always guided him. "Lucas, you fought so hard to get where you are. You've given up so much. Don't throw it all away now. Not for me." His voice broke as he tried to hold back the flood of emotions. "But I can't leave you like this." "You're not leaving me," she said, her tone softening. "I'll always be with you, no matter what happens. But you have to live your life, Lucas. That's what I want for you." Lucas felt the weight of her words settle over him, heavy and painful, but also filled with a kind of clarity he hadn't expected. His mother wasn't just asking him to keep playing, she was telling him that this was what she wanted most, for him to chase his dream, no matter how much it hurt to leave her side. "I don't know if I can do it," Lucas admitted, wiping his eyes. "You can," she whispered. "And you will." That night, as Lucas sat by her bedside, the reality of the situation sank in fully. His mother was dying and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But there was one thing he could do. He could honor her wishes. He could keep playing, not just for himself, but for her. For the woman who had always believed in him, even when no one else did. The next morning he returned to the training grounds, his heart heavy with the knowledge that his time with her was slipping away. But with every kick of the ball, with every sprint and every tackle, Lucas felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. He was playing for something bigger now, something that transcended the game. He was playing for his mother. The days passed in a blur, each one blending into the next as Lucas struggled to balance the demands of soccer with the heavy reality of his mother's illness. Every morning he pushed himself through grueling training sessions, focusing on every pass, every sprint, every shot on goal. But in the back of his mind, the thought of his mother's weakening condition never left him. He visited her in the hospital after every practice, often spending hours by her side, talking about the games, the team, anything to distract them both from the inevitable. Isabel, despite her frailty, always smiled when Lucas walked in. She asked about the team, about how he was performing, and never once let him see the pain she was in. But Lucas could see it. He saw the way her hands shook when she reached for his, the way her voice grew softer with each passing day. The doctor said there wasn't much time left, and Lucas could feel the pressure building. His mother was slipping away, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. It was during one of these late-night visits that she made her final request. Lucas had just finished telling her about an upcoming game, the biggest of the season so far, a match that could determine whether he'd finally earn his spot in the starting lineup. But his heart wasn't in it. He had been thinking about skipping the game, about staying by her side instead. The thought of being on the field while she lay in the hospital, fighting for her life, was unbearable. Isabel could sense his hesitation. She turned to him, her eyes still bright with the fire that had always driven her. "Lucas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to do something for me." "Anything, Mom," Lucas replied, leaning in closer, his heart aching with the weight of her words. "I want you to play," she said, her grip on his hand tightening just a little. "I want you to go out there and play in that game like it's the most important match of your life." Lucas stared at her confused. "But Mom, I can't. Not with you like this. I should be here with you." She shook her head slowly. "No, you shouldn't. You've worked too hard to get where you are. This is your moment, Lucas, and I want to see you shine. It's what I've always wanted for you." Tears welled up in his eyes as he tried to process her words. "But what if something happens while I'm gone? I don't think I can handle that." Isabel smiled gently, her voice filled with a calmness that only deepened Lucas's sadness. "If something happens, then you'll know I was watching over you, just like I always have. But promise me, you won't give up. Not now, not when you're so close." Lucas couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears streaming down his face as his mother's words sank in. She wanted him to play, even if it meant missing her final moments. She wanted him to live his dream, no matter the cost. The next day, Lucas arrived at the training grounds with a sense of determination unlike anything he'd ever felt before. The upcoming game loomed large in his mind, but it wasn't just about securing a spot on the team anymore. It was about honoring his mother's last wish. As the game approached, the weight of everything Lucas was carrying began to press down on him. His teammates noticed the change in him, He was quieter, more focused, but there was a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The coaches could see it too, and when they announced the starting lineup, Lucas's name was called. This was it. His mother's wish. Her final gift to him. On the morning of the game, Lucas went to the hospital to see her one last time before heading to the stadium. Isabel was weaker than ever, her breathing shallow, her body frail. But when she saw Lucas walk in wearing his team's colors, a spark lit up in her eyes. "You're going to do great," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lucas leaned down and kissed her forehead, tears threatening to spill over. "I'll make you proud, Mom. I promise." As he walked out of the hospital and toward the biggest game of his life, Lucas carried his mother's words with him, his heart heavy but filled with purpose. This game wasn't just about soccer anymore. It was about fulfilling her final wish. The roar of the crowd hit Lucas the moment he stepped onto the field. The stadium was packed, a sea of fans waving flags and chanting in unison, their energy pulsing through the air. Lucas had played in games before, but nothing like this. The stakes were higher now, not just for the team, but for him. This was the moment he had been working toward his entire life, and it was the moment his mother had asked him to embrace. As the team lined up for the kickoff, Lucas tried to steady his breathing. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to focus on the field, on the game, and on his mother's final wish. He could almost hear her voice in his head, reminding him to stay strong, to give it everything he had. The whistle blew, and the game began. The first few minutes were a blur of fast-paced passes and hard tackles. Lucas stayed in position, waiting for his chance. His teammates were moving the ball up the field, pressing the attack, but the opposing team was just as skilled, fighting back with everything they had. Lucas could feel the tension rising as the minutes ticked by, both teams struggling to gain the upper hand. He kept his eyes on the ball, waiting for the moment he could make his move. And then, in the blink of an eye, it came. A quick pass from one of his teammates sent the ball flying toward Lucas. Without thinking, he took off, sprinting down the field with the ball at his feet. The opposing defenders closed in on him, but Lucas didn't hesitate. He dodged one, then another, weaving through the defense with a precision that surprised even himself. The goal was in sight. Lucas could hear the crowd's roar growing louder, feel the weight of his teammates' expectations behind him. And just as he prepared to take the shot, a defender slammed into him, knocking him off balance. Lucas hit the ground hard, the impact jarring his body. The whistle blew and the referee pointed to the spot, a penalty. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Lucas barely heard it. He lay there for a moment, catching his breath, his heart racing. This was it, the chance to score, to prove himself, to honor his mother. As he got to his feet, his teammates gathered around him, slapping him on the back, offering words of encouragement. But all Lucas could think about was the penalty kick. He was the one who had drawn the foul. He would be the one to take the shot. The referee placed the ball on the penalty spot, and Lucas stepped forward. His legs felt heavy as he walked to the ball, the pressure of the moment pressing down on him. The crowd fell into an anxious silence, all eyes on him. His heart pounded in his chest as he positioned himself, staring down the goalkeeper. For a moment, everything else faded away. The crowd, the pressure, the noise, it all disappeared, and all that was left was the ball and the goal. Lucas took a deep breath, remembering his mother's face, her words. This is what she wanted. This is for her. He took his shot. The ball flew through the air fast and low, curving just past the goalkeeper's outstretched hand and slamming into the back of the net. The stadium exploded in cheers, the noise deafening. Lucas stood frozen for a second, hardly believing what had just happened. He had scored. His teammates rushed toward him, grabbing him in a tight embrace, shouting in excitement. But Lucas barely heard them. He looked up toward the stands, his mind immediately drifting back to his mother. She wasn't there, of course, but in his heart he felt her presence. He had done it. He had made her proud. The game continued with renewed intensity. Lucas, energized by the goal, threw himself into the match with everything he had. His body ached, his muscles burned, but he didn't care. Every pass, every sprint, every tackle felt like a tribute to his mother. He played harder than he ever had before, and his teammates fed off his energy, pushing the team forward. As the final whistle approached, Lucas's team was up by 1 goal, his goal. But the opposing team was fighting back with everything they had. In the dying minutes of the game, they launched one last desperate attack, driving the ball deep into Lucas's side of the field. The defenders scrambled to block the shot, but it slipped through, heading straight for the goal. Lucas watched in horror as the ball flew toward the net. Time seemed to slow down, the crowd holding its breath. But at the last second, his team's goalkeeper leaped into action, diving across the goal and punching the ball away. The whistle blew moments later, signaling the end of the game. They had won. Lucas collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed with relief, exhaustion, and emotion. His teammates swarmed him, celebrating the victory. But Lucas's thoughts were elsewhere. He had done it. He had fulfilled his mother's final wish, and in doing so, he had proven something to himself, that he belonged here, that soccer was his future. As the celebrations continued around him, Lucas pulled himself to his feet, his mind already turning to what came next. There was something he needed to do. He left the stadium as soon as the game ended, still wearing his jersey, and drove straight to the hospital. His heart pounded with anticipation and fear, unsure of what he would find when he got there. He burst through the hospital doors, racing down the hall to his mother's room. But when he stepped inside, he knew. His mother was gone. The doctors had already covered her with a sheet, but Lucas could still see her face, peaceful in the end. Tears welled in his eyes as he collapsed into a chair by her side, his heart breaking. She hadn't made it to see the end, but Lucas knew she had been with him in spirit. He had played for her. He had given her everything. And now he would carry her with him forever. The days after his mother's passing felt like a blur to Lucas. The joy of the victory on the field was swallowed by the overwhelming grief of losing her. He had honored her final wish, but it hadn't made saying goodbye any easier. As he sat alone in his small apartment, the weight of everything he had been through, the struggles, the sacrifices, the victories, crashed down on him. His phone had been buzzing nonstop since the game. Reporters wanted interviews, fans celebrated his performance, and his teammates were planning a celebration. But Lucas couldn't bring himself to respond to any of it. The only message he couldn't ignore came from his father. "We need to talk, call me." It had been months since he'd spoken to his father. The last conversation had been a bitter confrontation, full of harsh words and ultimatums. His father had made it clear that Lucas had to choose between soccer and his family, and Lucas had chosen soccer. But now everything was different. Lucas stared at the message for a long time, unsure of what to do. His father had always been a man of unshakable convictions, someone who saw life in black and white. There was no room for mistakes, no space for detours from the path laid out for him. But something in the tone of this message felt different. For the first time, there was no demand, no anger, just a simple request. With a deep breath, Lucas dialed the number. The phone barely rang before his father answered. "Lucas," Marcos said, his voice heavy with something Lucas hadn't expected. "Regret." "Dad," Lucas replied, unsure of what else to say. There was a long pause on the other end, the silence stretching between them like a gulf that had widened over the months of separation. Finally, his father spoke again. "I heard about the game. Your mother, she would have been so proud." Lucas swallowed the lump in his throat. "She was proud. She always supported me." "I know," Marcos said quietly. "I was wrong, Lucas, about everything." The admission caught Lucas off guard. His father wasn't one to admit mistakes, especially not ones as big as this. For as long as Lucas could remember, his father had been the immovable force in his life, the one who laid down the law, both at home and in court. But now there was a vulnerability in his voice that Lucas had never heard before. "I thought I was doing what was best for you," Marcos continued. "I thought I knew what your life should look like, what success should mean. But I didn't see what really mattered to you. I didn't see how much you loved the game, or how much you needed to find your own way." Lucas felt a surge of emotion well up inside him. His father's words, though late, meant everything. "I wanted you to be proud of me," Lucas admitted, his voice shaking. "I just wanted to make you proud." "I am proud of you, son," Marcos said, his voice thick with emotion. "I always was. I just didn't know how to show it." Tears filled Lucas's eyes as he listened to the words he had waited his whole life to hear. His father, the man who had always seemed so distant, so cold, was finally opening up. And in that moment, Lucas felt the tension between them begin to dissolve. "I'm sorry for everything," Marcos said, "for pushing you away, for not being there when you needed me." "I'm sorry too," Lucas replied, his heart heavy with the realization that they had both been carrying so much pain. "I should have tried harder to make you understand." They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of their shared grief and regret hanging between them. But it wasn't the same silence that had filled their home for years. This silence was softer, more forgiving. After a while, Marcos spoke again. "I want to help you with your career, if you'll let me. I know soccer isn't my world, but I want to support you however I can." Lucas smiled through his tears. "I'd like that." In the weeks that followed, Lucas began to pick up the pieces of his life. His career in soccer had only just begun, but already he could feel the winds of change pushing him forward. His performance in the last game had earned him a starting position on the team, and the media was buzzing with talk of his bright future. But more than anything, Lucas felt a sense of peace. He had honored his mother's final wish, and he had made peace with his father. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led him to where he was meant to be. With part of his earnings from the game, Lucas set up a foundation in his mother's name, a fund to help young athletes from underprivileged backgrounds pursue their dreams, just as he had. The Isabel Castillo Foundation would provide scholarships, training opportunities, and mentorship programs for kids who might otherwise never get the chance to shine. As he stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the foundation, Lucas felt a deep sense of pride. This was his way of keeping his mother's spirit alive, of carrying her legacy forward in a way that meant something real. She had always believed in him, and now he had a chance to give that belief back to others. And as Lucas stepped onto the field for his next game, he knew that no matter what happened, win or lose, he was finally playing not just for himself, but for something greater. For his mother, for his future, for the legacy they had built together. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more exciting content like this. We'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought about Lucas's journey, and if sports have ever changed your life in any way. Share your stories with us.